So, folks, I want to welcome you to the Tower series. Now, already we have a Tower series that includes concerts. We've had an organ concert. We've had hot jazz on a cold night. Yeah, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. And then on June 17th, that's a Monday, at 7 p.m., we will have a Juneteenth concert. And this concert is in cooperation with the Denise Graves Foundation, because our music director, Joyanne Amani, is, of all things, music director of the foundation. So that gives us a kind of, inward kind of thing. But I will tell you, I know the two African American students. Denise Graves Foundation is dedicated to providing opportunities for young artists of color. So I know these two people. I have heard them sing, and I am telling you, I sure hope Kevin sings Old Man River, because if he does, you will swoon, or whatever you do. But tonight, we are going to gather together to explore a dimension which for me is fascinating. Because in college, my major was scientific philosophy. And so, lo and behold, we have Bill Blair, who is going to be musing with us on the intersection between faith and science. Now, the people in the projection booth said, "Is it going to be a short introduction?" And I said, I had planned 40 minutes. But I said I could cut it down to 30. But I think I'll stop right now and have Bill come forward. Let's give him a round. I forgot the most important thing of all. There is something cool to drink and some cookies afterwards.
And perhaps the most important thing is the bathrooms are down the stairs at the back. And anyway, well, thanks for coming out on this hot evening. A little warm in the sanctuary here. Those of you that are coming online, welcome as well. It's great to be here tonight. I called this talk Musings of a Christian Astronomer. And you'll see it's not necessarily a single cohesive theme through the entire talk. Musings allows me to kind of do some different things and move from one topic to another. If there's a thread that goes through the presentation, it is the fact that my background is actually coming as a lifelong Christian and as a scientist, a professional scientist with over 300 publications in the professional journal at this point in my career, still working on a few, and having had this marvelous career and being trained as a scientist. And so that's the perspective that I'm bringing to these topics, these musings that you'll hear tonight. And I hope you get something out of them yourself, and I hope you enjoy some of this. So, life at the intersection of faith and science. Well, I thought I'd better tell you a little bit, whoops, where'd we go? There we go. A little bit about me, just so you have a little context. Here's future astrophysicist Billy Blair, about 18 months old probably. And if you can see there, I'm sitting outside. I grew up with a lot of nature around me. We had about 3 acres of property, a woods in the back, lots of active nature around, and it was just a wonderful childhood, and it was there was a sense of wonder in that experience. Interestingly enough, both of my grandparents, both of my grandfathers were Presbyterian ministers out here in New Jersey area and Pennsylvania. My folks moved out after the war to Michigan. We grew up as Congregationalists out there, and now for the last 40 years I came back to the East Coast, and I've been a Presbyterian again. And this is my home church right here at Babcock Presbyterian Church. So from a young age, you know, don't we all kind of look around and try to understand the world around us and how and why it works the way it does and how we fit in? For me, science and faith work together in that process to try to put together a framework for understanding creation. I don't choose one or the other, but rather I use both to try to help me understand this life that we are living on this planet. So when I was, this is very sensitive apparently, when I was growing up, this was my favorite hymn. This is my Father's World. Now, if you'd rather have it without the paternal aspect, you could also say this is God's wondrous world and substitute that in for Father's World on these verses. I learned it with Father's World, and I just wanted to read through a couple of these verses for you because it really set the stage for the way I thought about the world at that time, and in many ways I still do. This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, he shines in all that's fair, in the rustling grass I hear him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. That hymn was written by Dr. Maltby Babcock, who is the namesake for this church. And I didn't even realize that when we started going here. It was some number of years later that I realized this, my favorite hymn growing up, was actually written, and it was one of the few surviving hymns that he wrote that is in our hymn book that was written by Maltby Babcock. And I am here a long-time member of this church. So I think that's a pretty neat little connection that worked somehow. I'm not sure exactly how. So here's a little meme from I grabbed of Carl Sagan quote. It says, every kid starts out as a natural-born scientist, and then we beat it out of them in school, right? A few trickle through the system with their wonder and enthusiasm for science intact. And I count myself in that category. Somehow I made it through that process. I've had an awesome career. I don't want to dwell on this, but basically I came to Hopkins back in 1984 and have worked on two major telescope projects at Hopkins, one called the Hopkins Ultraviolet Telescope Project for the first 12 years I was here. And then I was the head of operations for a NASA satellite called the FUSE satellite, which was also headquartered down at JHU. And of course, over the course of my career, I've used a lot of the large ground-based telescopes as well for my research. And talk about a mountaintop experience, going to the observatory and seeing the skies, the heavens above, perhaps how the psalmist used to see it as well, was quite a mountaintop experience for me. From that, I went on to work on the James Webb Telescope. Of course, the James Webb Telescope is up there operational right now. It's coming in on its second year of science operations here in about a month. Spectacular pictures that are showing us everything from planets around other stars to star-forming regions in our own galaxy to the most distant things we can see in the universe. And being part of that project for 12 or 13 years as a project scientist for what is called user support, that is to say, the system that astronomers all over the world use to propose and use the telescope, the documentation and the software that they need to estimate how much time they need on the telescope and so forth, was the system that I oversaw the development of for the Webb telescope. So not only was I a working astronomer, but I also tried in my career to enable science by the astronomical community. Now, one of the things about astronomy that's kind of mind-bending is the large numbers that we talk about. And we talk about large numbers today even on the news, right? You talk about millions and billions, and God help us, trillions of dollars of national debt, that kind of thing and whatnot. But astronomy deals with some pretty big numbers. And I just wanted to spend a minute to put this in perspective. I'm really big on putting things in perspective, okay? So distances to galaxies and quasars out there, way out in the universe, are usually talked about in millions or billions of light years. Now, 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. So you can see from a human scale, that's 6 times 10 to the 12th. That's a big number, right? That's 1 light year. We're talking about millions, billions of light years distance away for things. And so it's hard to wrap your brain around that. But I just wanted you to remember that a million is 6 zeros, a billion is 1,000 millions. It's a factor of 1,000, not a factor of 10, right? We talk about, millions, billions, trillions, like it's a factor of 10. Those are factors of 1,000. A trillion is 1,000 billions, or a million millions, if you would rather, all right? A million millions is a trillion. So these are really big numbers that we use in astronomy. And sometimes I decided to use just one example in the time dimension for you. A million seconds is about 11 days. A billion seconds is 31 and a half years. So that factor of 1,000 is really impactful, right? Now, science tells us that our solar system is about 4.5 billion years old, that is to say the sun and the earth, and that the age of the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Right off the bat, that tells me that God cared for God's creation for a long time before we came into the picture, okay? I'll come back to that theme toward the end of the talk. But the other thing that happens with these big numbers is sometimes astronomers talk about what you would think is a big number, and we mean it to be a short number. 500 million years after the Big Bang is not very long, okay? So we talk about big numbers, but they actually mean something that's quite short compared to the lifetime of the universe. Okay, well, I love this picture. I don't know if you can see it better on the side or on the screen here, but this was the naked eye view. This, no doubt, is what the psalmist saw when he was standing out with the sheep, looking up at the sky, except this happens to be in the southern hemisphere. But you see here in the foreground, the planet Earth, all right, there in the foreground. And then just above that, we have a comet, which is part of our solar system. The planets around the sun, very nearby, right? And then cutting across the picture diagonally is the Milky Way, our home galaxy that we're viewing from inside it. And so we see, as we look farther away, we see this band of the Milky Way. But all those stars across the picture are all part of our Milky Way galaxy. And if you look real carefully, and I'm not sure if you can see it on the side, there are a couple of other little my pointer's not working, a couple of little fuzzballs off to the side. Those are neighboring galaxies of our Milky Way galaxy. Those are called the Magellanic Clouds, and they are orbiting our galaxy. But those are the next nearest galaxies to our Milky Way galaxy. The thing that I wanted to point out here is the tremendous depth that you see in these pictures, right? It looks like it's on a flat screen, but there's tremendous depth. Those little galaxies are 160,000 and 200,000 light years away. It means the light that if you went out in the southern hemisphere tonight and looked at those galaxies, the light left those galaxies that long ago, and we're just seeing it now. The farther away we look in the universe, the farther back in time we look. Because of these huge distances, it takes light time to get to us from these places. And so we see the distant universe not as it is today, as it was when the light left those objects that we're observing. And so it's important to keep that perspective in things as well. So that's the big picture of God's creation. And like I said, I can just imagine Psalm 8 is, of course, my favorite psalm. I'm sure many of you know this as well. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of us? Mere people that you care for us, and yet you have made us little lower than the angels and crowned us with glory and honor. The psalmist wrote that from a naked eye view of the universe. But what do we have now with modern science. We have telescopes like the Hubble telescope and the Webb telescope that tell us even more dramatically what was created when God created the heavens and the earth. Here, again, I hope you can maybe see on the side pictures a little bit better. This is called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. It's a little tiny piece of the sky that Hubble stared at for many, many hours in multiple filters, so it got a color picture. And almost everything you see in that picture is a distant galaxy, like our Milky Way, out into the universe. These are not things in our galaxy, our Milky Way. Those are all galaxies. It's just, imagine taking a laser beam and shining it at the wall and thinking of little dust particles in that beam all the way along. That's what you're seeing. Great, tremendous depth looking out into the universe. And over here it says over 500 hours of Hubble time went into to making this picture. I've blown up a picture on the side so you can see a little more detail there. Of course, the Webb telescope has also gotten into this game. Here's the very first picture from the Webb telescope that was released, and it's a deep field. We see one star there with the pattern, the little asterisk pattern on it. Everything else in that picture is a distant galaxy out into the universe. This is what was created when God created the heavens and the earth. Not just us, not just locally. The universe is part of God's creation. Just for context now, the galaxies here in the center, those white ones that are kind of clustered together, that's a galaxy cluster that's 4.6 billion light years away. And so a lot of those smaller ones are off into the distance even beyond that. Okay? Well, just for context, again, here I've shown the size of the field of view that the Webb camera gets, or the Hubble camera. They're pretty close to the same. And it's just a little tiny box in red in that inset in the left compared to the size of the moon. It's a tiny little piece of the sky, and yet that picture has over 10,000 galaxies in that one little piece of the sky. This is not a special piece of the sky. You could move it over a box, you could move it over 10 degrees, take another picture. It's going to look basically like this. There are galaxies everywhere in the universe. All right, it's an incredible fact of modern science that the universe is huge and the universe is very complex, and we're a tiny, tiny part of it. So that tells me that God's creation is awesome. If the naked eye view inspired awe in the writer of Psalm 8, what about the modern view of the universe as revealed by science? The thing that I find kind of interesting about this is if you and I have had a personal experience with this same God that created this universe, that's what really makes it awesome to me. There are a lot of scientists that don't have that perspective. And so I guess maybe, I don't know if I'm a mediocre scientist or a mediocre Christian. I'm not sure which way that works, but anyway, they both work. They both work for me. I use them both. God's creation is awesome. Here's a quote from Carl Sagan from one of his books. It says, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophet said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, my God is a little God, and I want God to stay that way." Well, that's not my perspective, but I guess there are people in the religious community that probably would voice that opinion. Well, this feeling of awe that we get when we see something like the grandeur of the universe is actually something that's a subject itself of scientific study. Here's a book by Dr. Keltner, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Berkeley, a whole book about this thing we call awe. And he has studied it from a social science perspective and found how impressive it is as a life force if we allow it to be. The quote I have is, "From our first breath to our last, awe moves us to deepen our relations with the wonders of life and to marvel at the vast mysteries that are part of our fleeting time here." And I just showed a picture of the recent Northern Lights display that we didn't see in Baltimore. Maybe some of our folks online were able to see that spectacular display of the Northern Lights. Here's a quote from Abraham Heschel, who was one of the great Jewish theologians of the 20th century. He says, "Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement." I love that. To get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. So this is a picture that I took on the front steps of the hallowed Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore. I was going over from the physics building for lunch there. This is the main entrance of the building. I'm sure hundreds of astronomers and technical people walk by these steps every day, and I wonder if any of them looked down and saw what I saw. A pansy somehow managing to grow through the cement steps down below. If we just open our eyes a little bit more effectively to the wonder that's all around us every day, it can make a tremendous difference in the way we look at the world. Here's a picture I grabbed off of Facebook a number of years ago. My brother John is quite a photographer, and he a naturalist, and he had this post. He said, "A brief moment in time is how I will always remember this photo. I had been collecting nice, colorful fall leaves on one of my walks last week and came across this nice log to display them on for a photo. I got them all arranged just right and then took out my camera to take this picture. And literally a fraction of a second after I clicked the shutter, a gust of wind blew them all away as if they were never there. Celebrating this gentle reminder to appreciate the wonderful things in our lives each day because you never know when they'll be gone." Well, let's lighten things up a little bit here. Here's Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin, they're out looking at the stars at night. He says, "That cloud of stars is our galaxy, the Milky Way. Our solar system is on the edge of it. We hurl through incomprehensible darkness in cosmic terms. We are subatomic particles in a grain of sand on an infinite beach." And they spend a moment looking at the stars, and then he says, "I wonder what's on TV." I put that in here to just kind of remind me to say that I wish we could live in that feeling of awe and wonder all the time, but let's face it, it's not practical. We can't do that, and it probably wouldn't be special if we could. But to the extent that we can open our eyes and see the wonders around us, I think it's better for all of us. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit now. We're going to get more into the science and religion aspect of things. Some definitions. Okay, science, a body of knowledge and a practice. That is to say, a way of learning about the natural world. From my perspective, religion is a little bit harder to define. Of course, you have religious practices, which are the observances that flow out of a particular religious commitment. But then there's theology, the study of God and the spiritual realm. And I said, note also a body of knowledge and a practice or method for adding to that body of knowledge. Okay, and so there's some parallels between science and religion on that level. Then you've got spirituality, which fits in there somewhere. It's not quite the same as religion, it's not quite the same as faith, and yet spirituality is a very important aspect of the equation as well. So I consider science and religion to be two worldviews that can be merged to provide a better understanding of our experience here on the earth. Both are in search of the truth. Of course, in Greek, it's reality, truth. They are in conflict sometimes, but they can also inform each other, I think. And conflicts exist, but I find that conflicts are mostly at the level of dogma or literal interpretation of the Bible and that kind of thing, and that's just not my religion, so I don't have a problem with that. Okay? This little graphic, is religions on one book. I wonder what that book is. And it says, "I know everything." And on the other side is a stack of books that says, "Science, I don't know enough." And they're still looking for more information. So there are some differences between these two worldviews, but I look for the common ground between them. So it's one little exercise in trying to do this, and it's not a totally successful exercise, but let's try it anyway. Here we say, science, if you don't make mistakes, you're doing it wrong. Nobody's perfect. We do experiments, we get an answer, somebody else may come and do that experiment and get a slightly different answer, and it's because of some experimental error or whatever. We correct ourselves. Science is self-correcting. If you don't correct those mistakes, you're doing it really wrong, and if you can't accept that you're mistaken, you're not doing science at all. Okay? Well, I said, what happens if we take that and we make it religion? Does it work? Religion, if you don't make mistakes, you're doing it wrong. Maybe, maybe not. If you don't correct those mistakes, you're doing it really wrong. Well, maybe. And if you can't accept that you're mistaken, you're not doing religion at all. Well, it doesn't quite work, does it? These two worldviews are not exactly interchangeable, and yet there are some similarities. So finding the common ground, how do we do that? Well, the importance of different perspectives. When I have a scientific question, I don't go to the Bible for the answer. It's not a science textbook, and we shouldn't treat it that way. But on the other hand, if I want to understand my relationship with God, I don't go to a science textbook either. You know where I go. In the magnificence of creation, I find compelling connection between what science tells me and what the Bible says. The Bible starts off by saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There was a beginning. Modern science tells us that there was a beginning. We see out today, as we look out into the universe, we see that the universe is expanding. If we go backwards in time, it had to be all in one place at one time. That was the beginning. We don't understand it yet, and we may never understand it fully, but there was a beginning. And science tells us that as much as the Bible does, and I really like that, aspect. Let's see. Did I get that? Yeah. So creation is understood through modern science, as we've seen, is awe-inspiring, more so than we could ever imagine otherwise. And so again, science and religion, I think, can work together in that respect. And here's another quote from Carl Sagan. He says, "Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in the immensity of light years and the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both." Now, interestingly enough, Carl Sagan can say something like that, and yet he was not a religious person. He did not believe in God. He, again, must have been missing something out of his personal experience that I've had that allows me to jump over that boundary and understand that these two things are different ways of looking at the same thing. And Captain Carl could not quite make that step, apparently, himself. Nonetheless, he was a tremendous science communicator and a wonderful, wonderful writer. Okay, so here's another musing of mine, is to think about science and religion and what constitutes various aspects of them. And I would argue that faith, evidence, and personal experience are all important aspects of both science and religion. And we'll go into this a little bit more in a minute. But just for instance, I already mentioned the personal experience aspect of it. Without that personal experience on the religious side, I would argue that Carl Sagan's view was not complete, all right? But because of my personal experience in both of these areas, I can move them together. Faith and evidence, well, clearly, maybe it's just the emphasis is different. Evidence is more important, facts are more important, logic is more important maybe for science, and faith may be more important for the religion side of things. But what about these other aspects? Faith in science or evidence in religion? Well, I want to spend a few slides talking about that because I do think that those are aspects that we don't maybe recognize as much as we should, but that are an important part of this discussion. So the idea that religion is based on faith and science is based on reason is oversimplified. Both are methods of arising at claims of knowledge, but by differing routes. Faith by way of belief, and reason by way of experimentation or logic. Combining both aspects rather than choosing between them can provide powerful insights. So I define faith here as the belief or trust in the unseen, the unknown, relying on our understanding of what has gone before. What is evidence, facts, or experiences that compel the mind to accept a concept as truth. Now, I would argue that we're familiar with faith in our religion. As a matter of fact, here's a quote from Hebrews. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was from things that are not visible. But I would argue also that there's an, evidence here in looking around us that God exists in the beauty and order of creation, the natural world, obviously the cosmos that we've been looking at, the intricacy and connectedness of life, and I'm sure we could do a whole talk about other things that would be considered evidence that God exists. What about faith in science? This is a little bit different, maybe. At its most basic level, science is based on a set of assumptions, which I take the liberty of calling faith statements that cannot be proven. And I have a few examples here. Constancy, the laws of physics apply throughout the cosmos. How can we test that? We have to assume that that's the case, and we get logical answers back when we do that, and so we assume that that is correct. Rationality, thinking processes are reliable. Uniformity, repeating an experiment exactly the same way gives the same result within the measurement errors. These are things that we put our faith in science, and if these assumptions were not true, much of science as we know it would not be possible. Other aspects of this that I would mention are that there's so much known now in scientific realm that nobody can know it all. We have to assume that previous experiments were done correctly, and we use that as our starting point going forward. There's an aspect of faith in what has gone before. A personal experience with this, a little bit different direction, is that I worked on the Webb Space Telescope for 12 years before it launched. I put my life and my career into a project where I had to have faith that the people that were building and testing the telescope were doing it correctly so that when it got up there, it was going to work properly. No guarantees, but that faith in them, in this case, paid off, and we have a wonderful new tool for astronomy up there working. So I think we don't give faith in science enough credit, because it's definitely part of the mystery. What about reason in religion? Well, theology does not require us to check our brains in the narthex on the way in, right? I mean, God gave us the ability to reason. God wants us to use it. The truth revealed by learning about the natural world should not be ignored by theology. And I just note here that reason has been historically been an important aspect of theological thought and biblical interpretation, going all the way back to, as we'll see, St. Augustine and possibly even before that. The conflict arises when dogmatic interpretations are levied against biblical writings and then applied as if they are scientific truths. As to Christianity, literal interpretations of Scripture is a development largely of the past 160 years, not a foundational doctrine like we treat it today. Obviously, there's the whole idea that the Bible has been translated, and there's another step along the chain as we translate that Bible. So literal interpretations are not where I come from. Here's good old Galileo, famous astronomer and scientist back in the 1600s. He says, "I do not feel obligated to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use." And that's the way I think about it too. Way to go, Galileo. Okay. Of course, this isn't something that just is in distant past. Here's a couple of current authors and theologians, Thomas Merton and Stephen Madison. I'll just read these because I'm sure they're pretty too small for you. Reason is, in fact, the path to faith, and faith takes over when reason can say no more. That's Thomas Merton. And Stephen Madison says, some people mistakenly believe that trusting in God requires them to distrust science, history, art, philosophy, and other forms of education, information, and truth. But intelligence is a friend of faith, and ignorance its enemy. God loves knowledge and truth, and any faith that objects to either is terribly misguided. So I just want to say a couple words about St. Augustine of Hippo. Back around 400 AD, one of the early founding fathers of the imperial church that became the Roman Catholic Church. The doctrine of the unity of truth. There is one truth. Apparent contradictions must be resolved by the exercise of reason. There's reason all the way back in religion, back in the early Christian church. The doctrine of the two books, which is carried forward in a lot of ways, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, which is science, I take that to be science, are two complementary ways that God reveals himself. Both books have the same author. They cannot contradict each other. So a couple more points from Augustine. Basically, both books require careful interpretation and the need for both religious knowledge and natural world scientific knowledge both reveal the majesty of God. Augustine considered religious knowledge to hold the prime position, but knowledge of the natural world was also indispensable. And he even, quote here, says, Christians who fail to inform their theology with reason run the risk of bringing ridicule upon themselves and the faith. So this idea of literal interpretation of the Bible is not a long-standing dogmatic position within the Christian church. Bringing that forward a little bit to Martin Luther, again, it's the two books. God writes the gospel not in the Bible alone, but also on trees and in the flowers and clouds and stars. Just like Maltby Babcock wrote in This Is My Father's World. Quote from Romans, ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things God has made. This is a picture of Butchart Gardens out in Victoria, British Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful setting. But I would argue that our modern perspective goes right along with that verse just as well. Okay? Well, not everything is copacetic between the two worldviews. Richard Feynman, famous physicist, 20th century, says religion is a culture of faith, science is a culture of doubt. I'm not sure I would use the word doubt, but I think skepticism is what is built into science, that until it is proven beyond a reasonable doubt, it is considered to be uncertain. But I think that's probably a too simple way of viewing this. But I like to think about science as addressing maybe the how things happen, but not why the things happen. And religious perspectives bring in this other aspect of what's behind it all. And I also want to point out that there are zealots on the science side of things as well. I won't read this all to you, but basically this was a blog entry that was comparing a scientific study on whether intercessory prayer worked or not. And the answer they came up with was, no, it doesn't make a difference. And I would argue that that shows a basic misunderstanding on the science side relative to the faith perspective, because prayer, and let's face it, we all kind of do this too, right? We pray for something and we want God to do it, but it doesn't work that way. If you really have an active prayer life, you know that prayer is how we communicate with God, and it provides a means for God to communicate with us. It's not a simple experiment of cause and effect that can be proven or disproven. So I would think that that whole study is bogus. Okay, well, what about mystery and miracles? Here's another musing section. The comic here, the scientist is written on the board, and in the middle it says, then a miracle occurs. And the person looking over the work says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. Miracles and mystery is a problem for science in a lot of ways, I think. But let's investigate this part a little bit. In science, a mystery is something that is begging to be explained. Solving or trying to solve mysteries is what science is all about. In our religious experience, science or mystery is a key element of our faith. And when it comes to God, there are some mysteries that are unsolvable. The incarnation, miracles large and small in the Bible and many in our own experience. The wonders of creation, as we've talked about it tonight, the space and time, and that God cares for us, are all mysteries that I believe are not solvable by science and should not be solved. I just don't try to reconcile some of these differences. These are differences in the way the two worldviews approach things, and I just accept that. Here's a quote from Albert Einstein, who says, "There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle." And when you stop and think about it, life itself is actually miraculous. Okay, so I will take one or two more steps through my musings here, and then we'll wrap things up. I wanted to talk a little bit about time as a part of creation. You know, we think about the physical universe, the dimensions of space that we know about. We know time is part of that whole thing. Time marches forward, after all. But we don't really think of time as having been created, as part of the creation. Einstein tells us we live in a universe where both space and time matter. They're all part of creation. Hence, the time dimension is also part of God's creation. The Big Bang, the creation event, like I said, took place about 13.8 billion years ago, but we've only been around for 120,000 years as Homo sapiens, maybe a little bit longer if you include some of the other precursor human species, but that's only one part of 100,000 in the time since the Big Bang. We are Johnny and Janie come latelys in this universe, okay? And again, what that tells me is that God loved and cared for creation and cares for creation, but he cared for it for a long time before people came into the picture. And I like the sunset picture here because I oftentimes think of those thousands and millions and literally billions of years where there was beauty, there were sunsets, there were sunrises happening, and no one around to see it. God loved his creation and created beauty even though no one was there to experience it directly. So here's a little thought process that I've had about time as part of creation. Since time is part of creation, God must exist outside of time as we know it. And yet, he is in time with us because we experience him in the here and now. Okay? Think of an artist is within their artwork and yet is separate from it. Okay? If God is outside of time, that changes our perspective quite a bit. And to me, it argues for the specialness of the present moment because that's where we can experience God in our everyday now moments. And that God is present in that now moment as part of his creation, even though God is outside of time, must be outside of time as we understand it. Billions of years of development, and it's like nothing for God, right? So God is in time and yet is separate from time because time was created as part of creation. Here's a little William Blake quote, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." It's just another awesome, mysterious aspect of God's creation. Okay, so let's come back here to Calvin and Hobbes again for a minute. Calvin says, "I suppose the secret to happiness is learning to appreciate the moment. For example, I take great pleasure in being right here, right now, doing what we're doing." And Hobbes says, "Of course, you're supposed to be in school." He says, "I couldn't appreciate those moments." Okay, well, what does the Bible say about time? Here's a little section of Ecclesiastes that comes right after the famous part that we all know about, that there's a time for this and a time for that. And if you keep reading a little bit, God has made everything suitable for its time, Moreover, God has put a sense of past and future into our minds, yet we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done this so that all should stand in awe before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already is. Well, my final musing tonight is to just pull a little bit of something that I've been looking into a little bit over the last couple of years, and that is Celtic Christianity, the tradition that was part of the Gaelic expression of Christianity, and in many ways was, in details, was at odds with the imperial Christianity that developed into the Roman Catholic perspective and from which we derive. The Celtic perspective has an emphasis on the goodness of creation, a sense of connectedness with creation that speaks much to us today as we consider our impact on our local part of creation, which is, of course, the earth. It stresses the goodness of creation and our connection to it. All of creation is our neighbor in the broadest sense, and here's a prayer from that tradition. There is no plant in the ground, but tells of your beauty, O Christ. There is no creature on the earth, there is no life in the sea, but proclaims your goodness. There is no bird on the wing, there is no star in the sky. There is nothing beneath the sun, but is full of your blessing. Listen, lighten my understanding of your presence all around, O Christ. Kindle my will to be caring for creation. This is an expression of panentheism. This is different than pantheism, which is everything that we treat the earth as if it is God. Panentheism is that God is in everything in creation, even in inanimate earth, in other people, in creatures. And I really like that perspective because we have to care for all of creation, including our home planet. Because there is no planet B. You know, we are doing terrible things to our home planet, our home here, that has sustained us all this time and that we hope will sustain us long into the future. But the way we're treating it is not conducive to that outcome. How much science tells us that our planet is finite. We see it just hanging out there against the blackness of space. It tells us, science tells us that we are doing terrible things to our planet, but religion informs us as to our stewardship responsibilities in caring for God's creation. It takes both of these aspects working together to cut through the political noise and address this crucial situation. If science could do it by itself, it would be doing it. The science is very clear as to what's going on, and yet we cannot seem to get the motion we need toward caring for our home planet. Our religion can provide us with that additional perspective, the care of creation perspective, and I hope we can do that. Well, I'm sure that you found some of this bewildering. I have to admit that some of it's bewildering to me, and I was telling you about it. But that's okay. For now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now we know only in part, but then we will know fully, even as we have been fully known. I thank you for listening tonight, and if you have a few questions, I'll be glad to try to, or comments, I'll be glad to try to address them. Thanks very much. And for the sake of our online folks, if you want to, if anybody has a comment, you want to come up and speak into the mic. I think that's on. Any comments, questions? When will that be available for us all to understand it 100%? I don't know. If you want to review parts of it, we will have the recording online. You can look back at it and puzzle over some of the things that went by too fast. How's that? Yes?
supposed to happen on the 3rd? By any chance, did you mention
the alignment of the planets? Yeah, there was a lot of stuff on Facebook about the alignment of the planets, and it was a typical clickbait thing. Yes, they were lining up, not exactly the way the graphics were showing them on Facebook, but in reality, if you got lucky and got up and looked, maybe you saw Saturn and Mars, because they were bright enough to be seen. But Neptune and Uranus are never bright enough to be seen naked eye. Even though they were there, you would not have been able to see them. And the other two that were mentioned were Mercury and Jupiter, and they were so far down close to the horizon that unless you had an excellent view of the horizon, and even then they would have been in the glow of morning twilight, you probably couldn't see them either. So instead of 6 planets, you likely saw 2 if you had clear skies and got up and looked at them. So can't believe everything you read. Any other comments, questions? Say again? BB2, yes. Yeah. In our Care of Creation group we used to have in the Presbyterian, we had 2 Bill Bs. So the gentleman that was in first was BB1 and I was BB2. So, and it was not alphabetical, so that was the tricky part about it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do this since we're...
So this idea of time. So if we were someplace else in the galaxy, is time the same there?
The time perspective. So there's 2 things, there's at least 2 things working here. One is, what is the time scale over which we expect things to change? A star that has a million or billion year lifetime, the fact that we're seeing it as it was a million or a billion years ago kind of doesn't matter because it really hasn't changed that much on that time scale. But we are literally seeing light that left it some time in the past. To maybe put this in a little better perspective, when we see the sunset, if you've got a nice view of the horizon and you watch the sun dip down below the horizon, it happened 8 minutes ago. It took light 8 minutes to get from the sun to us, to 93 million miles. So even locally, we can see the effects of time not being the same for everybody, and just extend that out to other galaxies and stars. But then when we see a supernova explode, and it does happen in real time, well, we're seeing it as it happened in real time when it happened, but of course it happened a million years ago or however far away it is. So yeah, it's kind of, the whole time dimension is kind of mind-bending. I agree. So, any other comments before we break for some goodies? Joyanne. You got it? Okay, thank you.
I'm going to be bold. Hi, I'm going to be bold. I don't even know how to ask this question, but how much, I like science fiction, and so I'm a big fan of, like, Star Trek. But
Star Trek.
I'm going to be bold. When you're, like, so some of the things that they talk about are actually, like, that they talked about, they're actually, like, true. So I'm just wondering, how much do they refer to this field of science when they come up with the things that they present, like the different galaxies, and then even with discovery and that whole thing with time and how they're able to have that, like, the quote-unquote black alert and end up places that are light years away.
Right.
How?
Well, so if we understood how that happened, we'd have actual, starships shooting around the galaxy. But as we understand, as physics understand, so the idea of Star Trek and movies portraying science, some of which is real and some of which is, how shall we say, pseudoscience or enhanced science by somebody's imagination.
Yeah.
It's not to say that, travel through some wormhole to another part of the universe might not be possible at some point, but we don't understand how it works right now, and the fact that it works in movies and whatnot is just for entertainment purposes. So you know, some of these things are literally just, you know, people cooking things up because it's cool, pseudoscience, and not real understood science.
But I guess I was, and I understand that. I was just wondering, do they work closely, like, you know, with with the sciences,
different producers and
different
directors
sciences?
work differently. You know, some of them work pretty closely. There was one, what was the Mars? There was a Mars movie, The Martian. The Martian. Parts of that were pretty good, and parts of it were, you know, not so good. So I mean, it you know, it depends. It's entertainment, so it's entertainment based in science at some level, and then they go off the rails.
Thank you. It has come true.
Say again?
I'm saying, but some of the entertainment that we saw years ago have come to fruition, and
Right,
so
right. Some of the stuff in science
it's
fiction
still,
writing
we're
has
still
come true.
brilliant. It's still amazing, right?
I mean, look at the Jetsons, right? Look at the Jetsons. Okay, we better cut it off. Well, I'll be glad to hang around and have some drinks with you back in the back, and we can talk some more. Thank you again for coming. I really appreciate your attention.